So, talking about SEC in depth and who's going to be at the top. A lot of talk around LSU being a favorite this year.
You're right.
What's some of the rumblings going on there?
Yeah, so I was listening to Crain Company, which is a pretty good college football podcast if you don't listen to it. And they had JD PicKell from On3 on there the other day, and they were doing their SEC power rankings. Now, the difference that a lot of times people do is they look ahead and they want to project. Well, Florida has a ridiculously hard schedule, so we're not going to rank them as high or whatever. They specifically said, when we do this, we are not going to look at schedule. We are going to assume they have the teams that they have now and just base it how powerful, how good do we think they are right now. And so they started, talking through the schools. When they got to the top three, I think it's the top three that you hear most people talking about, but maybe not in the order. So they had Texas at 3, they had Georgia at 2, and they had LSU at number 1. And the reasoning for LSU being so high is that LSU has a returning starting quarterback. Georgia doesn't. Texas doesn't. The team they had at number 4, Alabama, does not. So they said that's really a separator, is that all these other schools are starting new quarterbacks. And that makes such a difference playing on the road in the SEC that they felt that was enough to give LSU the edge.
Being that that's their logic, I'm really shocked that South Carolina isn't up there on this list.
Yeah, they had South Carolina in their rankings as well.
Well, I'm sure they did, but I mean, if their criteria is primarily around having a returning starting quarterback, Lenora Sellers, easily best quarterback in the SEC last year. Talent-wise, I mean, South Carolina was the talk of the town at the end of the season last year. They were the hottest team in college football. And they got a lot of guys coming back this year. Lenora Sellers going to be, top of the list there in the Heisman race. They've got some really good players coming back on defense too. One of the best edge rushers in the nation, Dylan Stewart. So I'm just kind of shocked that LSU is up there based off that criteria. But I mean, they are going to be a good team. They were in it till the end last year with everything going on. I mean, the SEC depth wise, it's going to be tough. It really is, because the Texas A&M, they got a returning starting quarterback who's pretty good.
Right. I think they had him. They just did top 8 in this ranking. I think most of them had Texas A&M around 8 or 7. Oh, it's funny because I don't even think they ended up having Tennessee in the top 8 after the Nico Imalava situation. They had Florida in there, and a couple of guys were higher on Florida, and a couple others weren't. And that's one of the discussions we talk about. The guys who are high on them are assuming that Lagway is going to be fine. But the other guy said, look, that's placing a lot of faith in a guy who hasn't been throwing at spring practice. Maybe he's been cleared, but you've got to hope that his shoulder is okay. Florida definitely has some pieces there. They're a team that could, if Lagway is back healthy, look at the pieces they've got. They have a very, very strong receiving room. They had good guys coming back, and they've got an awesome freshman. They've got probably the best center in the country blocking up front. They've got some good young running backs, and they always have talent on defense. So they need that quarterback to tie it together, but they could make a run as well.
They're going to be much tougher this year, having a full year of Lagway potentially. A lot of coming off a lot of momentum last year, and Billy Napier really turning everything around. So there's a lot of confidence in Gainesville with that. But one team that I would probably look out for is Ole Miss with Austin Simmons at quarterback. We saw him come in against Georgia and he looked awesome. He looked better than Jackson Dart at that time.
Yeah, they mentioned that one drive. They said Austin Simmons had an immaculate drive against Georgia.
He did.
That's a guy that they actually recruited, right? And Kiffin has been this go get the quarterback out of the portal type of guy. So it's interesting that Kiffin has faith in him. And he did it on the one big stage that he really had last year. He showed up. So if he develops, Ole Miss is a team that's relying heavily on the portal around him. It worked sometimes last year. Sometimes it didn't. The game against Georgia, it did. The game against Kentucky, not so much. So,
yeah, but I mean, if there's a guy in the SEC that you would trust with quarterbacks, is probably going to be Kiffin.
Kiffin, yeah.
Pretty good track record there.
Yeah. Another part of their discussion was when they decided to put Texas at 3. A lot of the country has Texas as the proverbial favorite in the SEC. They don't have the 100% confidence in Arch Manning that some people do. But to the other side of it, they said, but if his name wasn't Arch Manning and he didn't come in with all this expectation, would we be so critical of him? Would we be doubting him? Or would it be, it's a guy who's a third-year player who's getting ready to start? Would we be so hard on him? I don't know. And that's a good question, because if, let's say, that Arch Manning was about to become the starter at Georgia, would Georgia be in that 3 position and Texas be in that 2 position? Just because as much as people like Arch Manning, there are just as many people questioning him. It's kind of an interesting conversation, right?
It is interesting. And it really just makes me kind of want to look back at how Quinn Ewers was treated last year coming into the season, because he was coming off a pretty good year, high expectations, and I can't imagine that it's really that different for Arch, other than Arch is coming in with just a handful of starts and spot time here and there, and when he did get a chance to play against really good teams like Georgia, it didn't go very well.
It'll be interesting because Texas had such a good offensive line last year too. They had arguably the best left tackle in the country protecting Ewers. And that's one area where they're a little bit different. Obviously, Arch Manning is a little bit more mobile than Ewers was. And Ewers was hurt all year last year. He had an ankle injury that let Arch Manning actually start, a game last year. So it'll be interesting to see.
But yeah, that is an interesting question though you bring up. If he was at Georgia, would it be the same? And if he wasn't Arch Manning,
there would be people questioning him, but it seems like sometimes some people are questioning him too much. They're like, oh, he can't be what he was expected to be. He played against crap competition in high school. He's just there because he's a Manning. All that kind of stuff that kind of goes with it.
True. But also, I mean, I think a big reason Texas gets a lot of the big boy status, outside of the fact that, yes, they're really solid in the trenches, but landing Arch Manning was a huge, huge deal for Texas. That can't be understated. And that's when, people really are talking about, okay, Texas being back and all that, not winning a meaningless Sugar Bowl game.
Right.
Against Georgia.
Right. Because Sarkisian, when he got there, he had to rebuild that program. They had struggled, right? They had the Charlie Strong years, and then they had the Tom Herman years, and they never really figured it out, even though they were still Texas with all this history, with all this recruiting, with all this money. It needed somebody to turn it around. And as they were getting ready to come to the SEC, Steve Sarkisian, coming from Alabama, was the guy that understood what it took to transform a program, much like when Kirby, came back home to Georgia and kind of took Georgia from that next level of being under Coach Rick.
And going back to the criteria that we were talking about earlier with, having a returning starting quarterback really being a big part of LSU being, power rank number 1 here. Georgia's kind of the opposite. The rest of the team is really, really stacked. Georgia went out in the portal and bolstered that receiving room, which was really, really bad last year. And really, the big question mark is going to be Gunnar Stockton in that offensive line. So interesting that it's kind of, role reversal there in terms of the power rankings.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Georgia's receiving room and their kind of skill positions as a whole could really surprise some people this fall. Um, Obviously, you brought in Branch, you brought in Noah Thomas, you get Colby Young back, which not a lot of the country is, I think, even aware of that he's going to be back. And I think that's really a big deal. You get Dylan Bell back. You know, you've got London Humphreys another year in the program, and you've got 2 5-star freshmen coming in. So this
Yeah,
receiving
and
room that struggled last year, if it is just remotely average this fall, and Georgia is able to run the ball remotely average, not 109th, 110th in the country, this offense is going to
yeah.
move the ball.
Well, also don't forget about the tight ends. I mean, the pass catcher situation at Georgia this season is looking really, really good. You know, I've talked about it before. It looks like one of the best all around pass catching situations that Georgia's ever had.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me a lot of 2022, where we just had weapons to catch the ball. And I think that's part of the reason, you know, that Stetson was so good, right?
Oh yeah.
We love Stetson and he made plays, but he wasn't the best arm talent. But he made good throws and he had those guys around him. He had A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Kenny McIntosh, Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington. You know, he just had lots of weapons to throw the ball to, and it made a difference.
Yep. It's just like you said. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes.
Yep.